The passage in The Female Man, which has aged most badly to me, and which seems very disturbing to some of you, I know, and certainly to me, is the Laura Lee section, in which Janet seduces an underage teenage, barely teenage girl, which is described at some length. There are at least two different ways to approach this. One in terms of historical context and one in literary parodic context. Let me make both of those arguments in there. I'll admit these are mostly my own arguments about the text, not expressions of general consensus. First, my first instinct was on rediscovering the Laura Lee passage and rereading as prep was, oh, this is aged so badly, and that this is a historical remnant, arguably, about a moment in kind of gay culture when gay culture is underground and there is a kind of emphasis on where many people become gay first through various kinds of illicit seduction by older queer folk. I'm not saying this is an excuse, but as historical context, and where the sexual revolution is having a problem differentiating between various kinds of taboo sex, though at this moment in 2020, I think we've largely agreed, or some quarters have largely agreed on like consent, including age of consent, as a different, a reasonable restriction, as opposed to some other taboos which are now seen as simply as bias, as culturally programmed and not necessary. So there is that, and there's the problem of lesbian culture, gay culture often began. Many people found their way to their adult sexual identity through these kind of adolescent fumblings, often with a mentor figure. Which in no way excuse that. Let me say, as my cishet white guy, probably one of the great side benefits of increasing tolerance, besides the main benefit of increasing tolerance, is taking away the necessity, the tactile necessity for that kind of thing, where we can reestablish the healthy rule about leaving the kids alone. That's all true as far as it goes. I also believe, and I would argue, that the Laura Lee section is a parodic reenactment of Nabokov's novel Lolita, down to the name. Lolita is famously Nabokov's scandalous novel, narrated by a pedophile who's interested in 12-year-old girls, and who managed to seduce and abduct his 12-year-old stepdaughter and takes her on a kind of sexual road trip across the country. That novel is itself requires a whole separate discussion, and in various ways undermines the pedophile figure as a way of kind of working through some ideas. Besides, it's certainly, I would argue, well, no. If you're reading Lolita as pro-pedophilia, you just got Nabokov wrong. He's much trickier. Russ certainly knows that novel well. Nabokov's certainly on her mind. Nabokov was one of her college professors. Pynchon also studied under Nabokov. So she knows, she's very aware of Lolita and its success, which is only, 2 or 3 decades in the past when this book, the American publication of Lolita is about 21 years before this novel is published. So very much on Russ's mind, it would be fresh in her mind. The boarder who has illicit interest in the underage girl wearing jeans, singing a lap, this kind of thing somewhere in middle America. This is all a replay of Lolita. This is, I strongly suspect, one of the many times Russ is simply gender flipping other fictional scripts. So we're going to take Humbert seducing Dolores Hayes, whom he calls Lolita, and we're going to turn that around and make it a woman seducing a teenager. And what happens in this thought experiment if you do that? Doesn't mean it's not disturbing in some ways. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be disturbing. Even the name Laura Lee is a link back to Nabokov's text. Humbert, the narrative Lolita, often, he first of all makes up the imaginary name Lolita for his victim, but also associates her with the Poe poem about Laura Lee, You get it, um, down to the clothes Laura Lee is wearing or things that Lolita is wearing. So something is happening here. So this is also, you can pair this with the kind of seduction or sexual use of the Davy character very late in the day. These are two moments of a grown female woman having full sexual agency in this novel. The first time is super weird. It is a variation on a heterosexual story that had become a major hit in Western culture.